Links for all things covered here are provided in the video description box. Breaking news. Tonight, Michelle Bachmann became the first presidential candidate to sign a pledge created by the Family Leader, an influential social conservative group in Iowa. By signing the pledge, Bachmann vows to uphold the institution of marriage as only between one man and one woman, by committing herself to 14 specific steps. The 9th step calls for the banning of all forms of pornography. The pledge also states that homosexuality is both a choice and a health risk. Well, before I lose my patience over this issue and start shouting my lungs out for the unequivocal ignorance that I see on the surface of this issue, I think it would be best to observe the source in more detail and examine the family leader's reasons for taking what I consider to be such a radical and absurd stance on things like marriage, homosexuality, pornography, and what a presidential candidate should and should not support. It would only be fair to observe the finer points of this issue and see what rationale they have for such ludicrous suggestions. The following details about the marriage vow are highlighted in the second link below, and the pledge can be seen in its entirety in the third link. Homosexuality is a choice. The preface to the pledge reads, "Social protections have been evaporating as we have collectively debased the currency of marriage. In complete absence of empirical proof and non-heterosexual inclination are genetically determined, irresistible, and akin to innate traits like race, gender, and eye color, as well as anti-scientific bias, which holds against all empirical evidence that homosexual behavior in particular and sexual promiscuity in general optimizes individual or public health." Bear in mind first that, as I'll talk more about later, the Family Leader is a Christian organization. The level of irony is bitter indeed that this Christian organization holds such an incredibly high standard for empirical, scientific evidence that homosexuality isn't a choice, but they have no trouble at all basing the entire religion they use to justify their homophobic bigotry on faith. They're willing to dismiss all scientific neurological studies that explain homosexuality to be a natural orientation, not a matter of choice, and most face-palmingly they insist that heterosexuality is the default position. I demand that they present scientific evidence stronger than that which exists to validate homosexuality as not being a choice, that states heterosexuality is not a choice. I'd like for them to prove to me with the same level of empirical data that they aren't actually homosexuals, just choosing to be heterosexual. Thought experiment to homophobic straight people that think your sexual orientation is a choice. Could you choose to be sexually attracted to exclusively members of the same sex and lose all attraction that you currently have for members of the opposite sex? Didn't think so. Oh, and as for the debased currency of marriage, it's had a pathetic divorce rate throughout my entire lifetime among heterosexuals. So maybe your church's insistence on people requiring marriage before they're allowed to have guilt-free sex has more to do with the destruction of marriage than two people consecrating their loving relationship who happen to be the same gender. Homosexuality is like polygamy, adultery, polyandry. Vow 4 requires the candidate to pledge vigorous opposition to any redefinition of the institute of marriage through statutory, bureaucratic, and court-imposed recognition of intimate unions which are bigamous, polygamous, polyandrous, same-sex. Well, isn't that pleasant of them to suggest that a presidential candidate should vigorously oppose the concept of progressing and changing what is currently considered acceptable in society, even if it's in the interest of equality which harms nobody in any way? Homosexuality is a public health risk. Footnote 4 claims that homosexuality causes shorter life expectancy and a higher probability of a long list of sexually transmitted diseases. The leader has previously compared same-sex marriage to secondhand smoking. Where's all the empirical scientific data that states homosexuality in and of itself is the direct correlation to a shortened life expectancy for homosexuals? Have you considered the possibility that an average shorter homosexual life expectancy just might have more to do with the astronomical suicide rate of teenage homosexuals who grew up ostracized by the society run by hate-mongering, ignorant religious zealots in political office that reinforce the already cruel, ignorant, and intolerant teenage populace that surrounds them? Oh, no. That's not possibly a factor worth considering. It must be because of the way they have sex, since that makes you more uncomfortable than teenagers killing themselves for feeling guilty about who they are. Sex is better after marriage. Vow 5 requires the candidate to support the notion that married people enjoy better health, better sex. So this is what trolls do when they grow up and leave their mother's basements. They go and propose political legislation for religious lobby groups. Pornography should be banned. Vow 9 stipulates the candidate must support human protection of women and the innocent fruit of conjugal intimacy, and protect them from seduction into promiscuity and all forms of pornography and other types of coercion or stolen innocence. If you want women to be protected rather than denied one of the few lines of work that actually seeks them more actively, empowers them sexually, and financially supplements them far better than men, then you shouldn't be looking to ban pornography. You should be looking to regulate it so that cases where women are abused get diminished as much as possible. I find it embarrassing that a female like Michelle Bachmann would stand up and say we need to protect those poor women from themselves who choose of their own volition to enter a career in pornography. I also love the language of this vow because it acts like pornography is the profession that leads to coercion and stolen innocence. Ever heard of politics, Michelle? Vow 11 requires the candidate to reject Sharia law. Here's the kicker, folks. The entire point of this miserable proposal is to state that only candidates who agree with the religious conservative position of this one group should be allowed to even run for office as President of the United States. In order to be eligible for presidency, you must take the same stances on the issues that they do. Otherwise, you're not fit for presidency. I think a person who wants to spread Sharia law into federal U.S. government from sea to shining sea deserves the same right to run for president as anyone else. That person should be able to run under a Sharia law platform if he or she chooses to do so. Fred Phelps should be able to run for president if he wants to. It's the responsibility of the voters to decide if that's the kind of president they want. It's our responsibility as citizens to be aware that such a person is attempting to assume control of Congress and to be informed about what Sharia law is or any other items of radical platforms are. It's our responsibility to decide what kind of politicians deserve to be candidates, and usually the populace does a pretty lousy job of it because they don't get involved with politics on a local level. They just wait and see what smiling, lying bastards in a tie got nominated by the rich, informed upper crust of the population. Then they cast their votes every 4 years for one of them to feel like they made an impact. That's the change that needs to happen, not some biased religious filter formed by one demographic that people have to pass through just to become legitimate candidates. Now, we're not done yet, kids. Also, from the preface of the vow, we believe that the candidate's position on core values such as marriage correlate directly to his or her moral stances on energy issues, sound budgeting policies, national defense, and economic policies. What? Not only is the Bible an atrocious source of morality, in my opinion, but how do you make the connection between someone being against homosexuals getting married and what's morally correct? How is your stance on refusing to treat people as equals something that makes you more moral, without citing your Bible for justification, of course? Then, explain how you make the jump from one having good morals according to Christianity to being fit for dealing with issues like energy, budgeting, policies, national defense, and economics. Last I checked, you don't suddenly become a better conservationist, accountant, war general, or economist the instant you oppose gay marriage. Lastly, the preface states this: the Family Leader is a Christian conservative organization which provides a consistent, courageous voice in the churches, in the legislature, in the media, in the courtroom, in the public square, always standing for God's truth in order to strengthen the family. First of all, public churches, media, and public squares are perfectly acceptable places for you to push your anti-gay agenda, and people are free to listen, ignore, or refute your bullshit at their own discretion. But legislature and courtrooms are no place for it. You don't get to claim that you have God's truth unless you can substantiate you have some unique connection to God himself. And based on your standard of scientific empirical evidence that's even stronger than the neurological studies that prove homosexuality is not a choice, I think you're going to have some trouble proving that your God even exists, let alone that you know his truth. Now, in the meantime, you know who else claims to know God's truth and thinks that their rules are laws that are perfect for strengthening families and countries? That's right, that same group of Sharia law supporters you're trying to ban. Figure that out.